Okay, just a little perspective shot here. I've got a bunch of mess of wiring underneath this Wildcat where I have several positive wires going to the positive, a few going to the negative. The problem I'm having is the battery doesn't fit in well because the wires are so tight around it. It's hard to wiggle the battery, and then the wires are stressed. So I'm extending some of these wires so they're longer. So this wire you can't see because it's laying underneath here, but I extended it right there, and I put a new little thing on here. Now, there's been a lot of discussion of what's a good wire connection. I'm going to show you guys how I do my wiring, and I never, and I mean never, in 30 years have had to replace one of my connections ever. And I'm going to show you what I do because I use it all the time. And if I have a problem with my circuit, guess what I don't check is my connection, because I'm 100% confident that that is not the problem. And so far, I haven't had a problem. That's how I do on my trailers, the RVs that I've wired, the trailers that I've rewired, everything that I wire on my truck, motorcycles, whatever. This is how I do it. So these connectors I've had for 25 or 30 years. See those connectors? See these connectors? I don't use them. I don't even know why I have them. I bought this set, and I bought a couple sets like this over the years. These are actually heat shrink connectors, and they do heat shrink, but it's still a crimp connection. It does heat shrink around it. We'll keep most of the corrosion out of it, but to me, it's just not 100% bomb proof. So I'm going to show you how I do mine. Okay, first things first, we're just going to strip this a little bit. Let's make it a little longer. More like that, okay? Then we're going to get some new wire. I'm going to make it a little bit longer than the original, something like that. That's good. Same thing, we're going to strip about the same length. Okay, I stripped them a little longer. Let's go ahead and splay them like this. So they're fanned out. Going to lay them on top of each other like that. Okay. Just kind of splay them, and then we're going to just twist them together like this. Okay. Now, doesn't have to be super tight, but enough to hold it in place. Take our soldering iron. This is 140/100 watts. So the first pull of the trigger is 140. If you pull it further, it goes to 100. Hopefully that's coming out in the camera. So we're just going to put it on 140. I'm just going to set it on here. Let it heat up. Once it heats up enough and starts smoking, the solder is starting to melt on the tip of the iron. We're just going to give it about 10 more seconds to make sure this metal gets nice and hot. Now this is kind of thin metal right here that I'm working on, so it shouldn't be too big of a heat sink. So now I'm just going to go ahead and touch right beside. And see how it just melts over the wire? And then I'm just going to run it just to make sure it makes good penetration everywhere. The whole wire's covered all the way around. That's hot, so don't set it on anything you don't want it to melt. Okay, and that's cool right there. That's good. Now, what we'll do is we'll bend it over. Hot, hot, hot. Like that. I'm going to let it cool for a minute. Okay, so now, this connection, I'm just going to show you. Of course, you can't see how hard I'm pulling on this, but I'm going to... Okay, that is never going to pull apart, ever, ever. You can... I think it's as strong as the wire. I may be wrong, but I think it's at least as strong as the wire. Okay, so don't forget your heat shrink. We're going to slide some heat shrink over this end before we put our last little eyepiece on, or loop connector, whatever it's called. And now we're going to slide this on here. Okay, and we'll get the little butane torch. Try to kind of center, make sure it's in the center there. Just heat shrink this down. We're on both sides good enough. Okay, good. That's a solid connection right there. Even if moisture gets inside here, that soldered connection is going to keep those wires that are splayed together and then twisted together. Those are all soldered together. So the corrosion will never be able to separate those wires because of the solder joint there, okay? So let's go to the other end of it now. Now we don't need that much off this one. Okay, about like that. And I'm going to use one of these just because that's a good size for the bolt that I'm going to be putting through it. Now I'm going to cut this off. Why? Because I don't care about that. So I'll show you what I mean. For example, all I want is that right there. This is heat shrink, and this would be great to use. So you slide your wire in, obviously you crimp it, but that crimp connection, moisture can still get through that hole right there, right? So when, you know, when I did all this on my boat, I never ever had to chase a wire that I connected, ever. Because they just, even they were wet all the time and wires were corroding and turning green, my connections that I did just like this right here were never a problem. So that's just why I try to, it takes a little bit more time than just crimping it and moving on, but that's why I do it, because I know I'll never have to mess with it again. So we're going to cut this off. We're going to slide this on like this. And I want to leave a little bit, I'll show you. So we don't need to crimp the heck out of this one, but we're going to crimp it just kind of like that, okay? I want to leave a little bit, that's not even tight, is it? I want to leave a little bit of wire exposed right there so I can drop some solder so the solder will wick up inside that way as well as down that way. So again, I'll just wait till it starts smoking. That means the solder on the tip's starting to heat up and start to get fluid. Then I'll just give it about 10 more seconds, and then I'll start feeding solder into it. Now this is 60-40 rosin core solder, and I forget what thickness it is, but you can see the solder starting to wick out the back right there just from the front. See it? So let that heat up for a second. We'll just put a little bit in the back right there. Cool. So that's a connection. Water can't even get inside. So even if my heat shrink were to fail or my electrical tape that I wrap around it or whatever, no big deal. Now, little quick tip here, don't slide this on too soon because the heat from that will shrink that before you get it all the way on. So just wait for it to cool off a little bit. Still kind of hot. We'll let it to cool off and then we'll slide this on. Okay, so it's cool enough. We'll slide that up to right there. I don't want to slide it much past that because I want room for my other pieces to lay across here like this. Good enough. Let's put the butane torch on it. Of course, you can use a lighter or whatever, right? Okay. Now that, my friend, is bomb-proof right there. I can get this and try to pull this apart. And it's not moving, okay? Okay, same thing here. I made this little extension wire for the battery. This is like 8 gauge or something. And you can see right there the solder that's built up inside there. So those are crimped over and then soldered on both ends. Same thing there. And that's just totally, this is totally bomb-proof. Truly, truly bomb-proof. You can't pull it apart. It'll never corrode. It's served me really well for the past 30 years I've been doing this. So seriously consider it. You got a couple tools to invest in. One's a good soldering iron. This isn't the little pencil one. This is one that really makes some watts, 140 watts. That puts out some heat. It gets pretty dang hot on the end. That's something you want to heat up quickly. Now, that you'll have to invest in some solder, of course. Heat shrink comes at every auto parts store and every Ace Hardware. You can probably find it, or every kind of hardware store. And obviously you'll need some crimp connectors that you can take this off pretty easily. Now, the other tool that I love, of course you need a wire stripper, obviously, but this little thing I just love. It crimps on that end. It has a cutter there, and you adjust it to where you just sit your wire in there and grab it, and it just splits it off right away. You don't have to worry about, oh, is that 14 gauge or 12 gauge or 16 gauge or whatever that you're trying to figure out on your wire stripper. And it makes things go a lot faster. Just click, click, and it just strips your wire off. You can use this propane torch for heating this up and then dripping and then putting your solder on it. The problem is this torch gets so dang hot, it starts to melt the wire and melts your wire sheathing right here. And it just kind of melts everything around it. So unless I'm doing something really heavy, for example, when I was putting some of these connectors on for the truck, and I had some really big connectors. This is size 4 wire. So this is pretty dang big, and this obviously isn't going to do that. This soldering iron isn't going to heat this up fast enough. The metal around it's just going to wick the heat away. It's just going to be a big heat sink. So that's where this comes in. Okay, does a good job. This brand, by the way, if you live at altitude, PT Performance Tool, and is there a part number on it? I don't see a part number on it, but if you find this Performance Tool, this one, we live at 7,500 feet here, and I've gone through several of these and they just don't run at this altitude. This is the first one I've actually found that runs at this altitude and works well and consistently, no matter what the temperature, even if it's cold out. So I'm really happy with this brand. All right, hope this helps you guys. This does take a little more time. It's a little bit more investment in tools that you need as far as the soldering iron goes and the solder goes, but I'm serious, you will never ever have to mess or worry about your connection if something goes wrong with that circuit that you put together. That will not be the problem.